happened? Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history of Make America Great Again. How can you be against them?
Donald Trump will have no penalty, not probation, jail time, or even a fine for his felony conviction in the New York hush money case. But he goes down in history as a felon, and the conviction of 34 felony counts stands on his record. Welcome to this special episode of Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm joined in studio by my colleagues, Rhonda Colvin, James Hohmann, and JM Rieger. We're also joined by Shayna Jacobs, who's in New York and just witnessed the sentencing hearing. Shayna, thank you so much for taking a moment from your crazy deadlines to join us. Really grateful for that. So let's recap this breaking news day. So on Friday morning, New York Supreme Court Justice Juan Merchan gave Trump an unconditional discharge. The court released audio of the sentencing, so we'll be able to play some of that for you. And in fact, to dive in, let's just hear Judge Merchan in his own words delivering the sentence.
This court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge, which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree.
Okay, Rhonda, what does this mean, practically speaking?
Well, practically speaking, as you've described, it is a sentence that will not have any sort of punitive measures such as a fine, jail time, probation, all of those things. I think, and for those people who were listening to us earlier this week, we were talking about this, that it appeared that the judge wanted to just tie this up, to have some closure to a case that was heard by a jury of Donald Trump's peers. They came back with a decision, and this sort of was just, the end of that entire process. So it almost felt just like a formality. We kind of knew it was going in this direction. I think Merchan had signaled before that he would not, assess any sort of jail time or anything like that.
But this does jail time, but I personally wonder, would there be some kind of a fine or some sort of a way to sort of quote unquote make justice to the people of New York?
Yeah, and I also think it speaks to the fact that this was also novel. And that's also, I know we'll talk a little bit about some of the other cases and their status, but it shows you that Donald Trump has somewhat bewildered the legal system because he is a former president and soon to be president again, that a lot of the things he was able to use in terms of delays and other matters, it was because there was no precedent for any of this. So again, this is historic, but it does sort of just tie this whole process up in New York.
And James, what is the justification for him essentially, and I'm using air quotes here, like get off?
The conviction can still be appealed, and I imagine Trump will appeal it. But I think Merchan is saying, once you're president, I can't really pull you in anymore. And so let's get this over with so that this isn't sort of hanging out on the docket for 4 more years so that there's this sort of formality in 2029. But let's just, when he might not even be on the bench anymore, let's just like
that seems inconceivable to revisit this in 4 years. Well, let me play a little bit more of what Merchan said, because it does give a sense of why he believes there should be sort of no actual penalty, so to speak, in this case. Let's listen.
It is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office.
JM, that really says it all, doesn't it? This is not about Donald J. Trump. This is about the future president of the United States.
Yes, and not only what it means for him to be in the office of the White House, but also the lingering effect of that immunity decision over the summer from the Supreme Court. We saw both of those really play a central role today.
Shayna, set the scene for us. What was it like in court today?
It was a bit unique because Trump wasn't there, obviously, and the focal point of the courtroom was on a screen and not in front of us as he was the whole trial. It did really feel like a formality pretty much throughout. As expected, the prosecutors made a very strong statement about the gravity of the offenses and about Trump's behavior throughout the trial, including the various times he violated a gag order that was meant to protect people involved in the case and people not involved in the case, family members of people involved in the case. So it was sort of about making the historical record of what this case was, what it represented, what came out at trial, what the evidence proved, and what the jury found, as well as for Judge Merchan, why he tied this case up with a sentence that is, I mean, exceedingly rare. If you're going to give someone an unconditional discharge, normally that would be a case that just gets dismissed. But here, it's not being dismissed. It's obviously part of, the public record, and it's not being sealed. It's not being voided. It is still there. It just is not resulting in any type of penalty at all.
It's fascinating because, as you mentioned, like Trump appeared remotely. He didn't have to go in person. That was a special condition that Juan Merchan set on this because he's the future president of the United States. But I want to play some audio of how Trump sort of talked about this. Because the sentencing, Shayna, sentencings are the time for the defendant to tell us, Shayna, you're the one who covers it all the time. What do defendants usually do at a sentencing? Because in my mind, it's like they either try to explain mitigating circumstances or apologize or reassert their claim of innocence. What is typical in a sentencing hearing for a defendant to do?
So, that's a great point. Today was anything but typical for so many reasons. Typically a defendant shows up in court, whether they're already in jail or not, to learn their fate. And the sentencing hearing, the sentencing proceeding, is all about trying to convince the judge to go, to be more lenient, or if you're the prosecutor, whatever position they have. It's never done in advance. It just doesn't happen, which is something that Merchan made note of in his decision, setting this up. So, that's strange to begin with. You don't normally go in knowing what the judge is going to do. The judge sometimes knows what they're going to do before they hear from everyone. But, for Trump too, I think it was about getting his word on record. We've heard him say those things over and over and over since even before the trial that ended in May. So nothing that Trump said came as a surprise. He's not admitting guilt. He's not admitting, he's not conceding that the verdict was justified. He's challenging it still, and he's going to appeal it. And, maybe the immunity issue gets, heard in full by the Supreme Court, and he has a chance at winning an appeal. But, right now he's a officially convicted felon, and he's entering the White House with that designation.
In just 10 days after this sentencing. If I close my eyes, it's like I can hear it over and over, like totally innocent, totally. Heard it so much at rallies, heard it so much as he talked outside the court. And Trump is a master of the repetition and getting those phrases sort of drilled into our minds. Mm-hmm. But he did talk about sort of how he thinks this plays into the political moment, and we can listen to Donald Trump. A reminder, this is remote. He wasn't there in person, but he was able to come in by audio and video and say this.
It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican to date in history. It's true that he got the largest number of votes of a Republican by far. Just to fact check, he did not end up actually winning a majority of the popular vote. As more votes have been tallied, he ended up just under 50%. It wasn't a landslide. He won 7 of the 7 swing states this year, but it wasn't, that much different than Barack Obama's win in 2012, for example. But quibbling aside, it's a weird thing because Trump is sort of claiming vindication, and he did get vindication of sorts at the ballot box, but he is being sentenced as a convicted felon. There's some irony there as he talks about making Canada the 51st state or whatever. There were all these people who couldn't go to Canada for Taylor Swift concerts a few months ago because they had felonies on their record, and Canada doesn't allow them in. Obviously, they'll make an exception for the current president, but he is a convicted felon. That is, so it is this kind of surreal dynamic.
I was like, where is James going with Taylor Swift in Canada? It all made sense in the end. You hit it home. So Rhonda, and then, I never heard Juan Merchan's voice. I don't
Yeah.
think any of us had, except for you, Shayna, who was in that courtroom day after day.
Yeah, I was thinking that was another unique moment of this whole thing is we read his words, we followed his words, and I've been wondering too how he appeared today. And although we're hearing the audio, I'd love to hear if Shayna has any insight on how did Merchan present himself today? Was he just like tying this up and moving on with the rest of his day, or did he kind of understand the historical moment of what he was saying?
He certainly understood that it was a big moment, but it sort of proceeded like he also understood that it was a putting finality on something that has been pending in front of him for so long. He takes it very seriously. He's very businesslike, with the exception of sometimes losing his cool at the defense for making certain arguments that he thought were repetitious or irrelevant. At times, he treats both sides fairly. His demeanor is cool and composed. He's not easily rattled, even though this judge has faced an onslaught of threats. There's been threats against his family. There's been this case has been nothing but a huge headache for him, I'm sure, personally, this entire time. His daughter's been dragged into it. This is something that has to have weighed heavily on him since it became, a real case. He was actually the judge on the tax fraud case in the same courthouse against the Trump organization and Alan Weisselberg. So he received a lot of hate and anger from Trump supporters then, and it's just been a lot. It is so much more. It's so much more for any one judge to face than you would normally face, even in a criminal court, from people who have other cases there or their family members. It's just it is so far out of the realm of the norm of how a judge, of the type of feedback and reaction that a judge would get in that courthouse. And that's a courthouse that has seen many, many big cases over the years.
Rhonda, let's listen to how Juan Merchan wrapped this all up and ended it.
Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office.
This is stunning because, yes, it is, to me, it shows that he knows the historical record, wanted to make sure that, what he was saying brought finality, as we've been talking about. But if you just think about those words in one sentence, good luck on your second term, that probably has never been said, and I don't know if it will be said again, referring to a judge ending a case and sending a president on their way. It's stunning. It tells you about the political moment we're in. I feel like that sentence is going to go down in history books because if you just think about the weight of it, that he is telling a felon, this is your sentence, and also good luck running the country for the second time. It's really mind-blowing. Sometimes we just don't take a step back and think about that, but it's really an incredible moment.
Let's remember that originally sentencing for the conviction was scheduled for July 11th, right on the eve of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. And we had sort of imagined, you were up there, obviously, and it was sort of like covering how we're going to cover the sentencing and then go right to the convention. And the Supreme Court's immunity decision delayed it. It's been delayed a couple other times. There have obviously been all these appeals, even internally this week. It's sort of been like, well, we'll believe it when we see it, when this actually happens. And I'm sure all of that's been hanging over the judge, that this is sort of this outstanding thing that he clearly did want to just get wrapped up.
Well, I do think this whole thing is the lingering effect, not only of the immunity decision and not only of the election, which we knew was really going to determine the outcome of all of these cases, but of Trump's delay tactics, right? This sentencing was delayed 4 different times, right? It was going to be in July, then it was going to be in September, then it was going to be at the end of November, then it was delayed indefinitely. And then last week, a week ago, it's like, well, it's going to be today. And throughout that whole process, it was the most recent one was so that Trump could yet again appeal the immunity decision in a different way before Merchan.
Before we let Shayna go, Merchan said everything happening, like swirling around this case, happening outside the courtroom, made this extraordinary. But he was very clear to say that everything happening inside the confines of his courtroom were ordinary, typical, and what defendants face all the time in New York. And I thought that was fascinating, Shayna, that he was really making this, using this moment to like put a stamp on, we have conducted business, we have done it the way it's supposed to be done, and we have not let this circus swirling around all of this, or the title and name of the defendant affect how we tried to render justice here.
Yeah, I mean, against many odds, he was the only judge of the, overseeing one of the 4 criminal cases who succeeded in trying the case before the election. I mean, a fair amount of time before. It's, normal. Nothing is normal about this case. And I should probably say the same for all of the Trump cases. But this is, the world is watching. And he had, as the jurist presiding over this case, he has to block that out to whatever extent you possibly, any human being possibly could, and try to conduct a proceeding the way it's conducted every day in that courthouse. And I mean, there came a point, obviously, where current events could not be ignored. I mean, the Supreme Court decision in July, it's expanding the definition of presidential immunity, was the cause of essentially most of these several delays. I mean, he could have just said, screw that, we're sentencing you. You can continue to fight this on appeal. But he didn't. He gave Trump's lawyers chance after chance after chance to get their arguments right, to hone them, and gave careful thought to those arguments. I mean, it was a monumental task trying to keep this an orderly process, keeping jurors safe, keeping attendees at the courthouse safe, keeping other people showing up for their cases, and lawyers and clerks, everyone else who's in that building every day, keeping them safe. I mean, and there were many threats. There were many threats going on while the trial was underway, and before and after. And I mean, it's almost inconceivable how unusual this was, even by the standard of any other big celebrity case in this courthouse or any other. I mean, it is still so unique and one of a kind.
Yeah, and that courthouse has seen a lot of dramatic cases, but nothing quite like this.
But I mean, he gave himself some credit today. He said, what happened in this courtroom, as you heard, was done properly, was done with, in accordance to what we always do. And that was no easy feat. I mean, the trial could have faced any number of interruptions from witnesses, from any number of issues, and he plowed ahead. And I think this was his way of wrapping up what he started, I guess, by pushing into motion a trial that was going to end before the election.
Shayna Jacobs, thank you so much. We'll let you go now and get back to all your other assignments today related to this case. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
James.
I was really struck to Shayna's point, listening to the audio, that the judge repeatedly referred to the defendant as Mr. Trump, not President Trump. And I think that to me seemed like he was trying to keep this as normal a proceeding. Obviously, at the very end, he says, Godspeed, good luck in your second term. But he's trying to treat him as a defendant, not as, the president. And I thought that was clearly a conscious choice that spoke volumes about his larger efforts during this trial to maintain as much a semblance of treating Trump like a normal defendant as possible. And there were limitations to how possible that was because of the security considerations and everything else.
I want to play one last piece of the tape from the sentencing today, because Donald Trump spent a lot of time just talking about a lot of stuff, right? It wasn't just like, I'm totally innocent, I won the election, see the Supreme Court about this whole immunity thing I've got going on. He had lots else to say, so let's listen.
With all that's happening in our country today, with the city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense.
When you hear that, JM, what do you make of it?
This whole time, he's been making it a very personal and political. He's nonstop talked about how political this case is. I don't think it's abnormal at all for Trump to sort of go off script and ramble on about essentially political grievances, right?
It's very on brand.
It's very on brand for him. Mershon last week, when he said that they were going to have the sentencing today, talked about Trump's attacks on the judiciary, right? And we've talked, a theme throughout this that everyone's touched on here is how out of the ordinary this entire process is. And one of the things that is more out of the ordinary is how Trump has attacked the process and the institution here the whole time. Again, very on brand for him, but also remarkable to hear him just going on about all these different issues that are not germane at all to the case.
Trump tried to get the Supreme Court to intervene and stop this sentencing, James.
Last minute, the Supreme Court, without comment, basically decided 5-4 to allow Judge Mershon to move forward with this today. The two conservatives who decided with the liberals were Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, whom Trump appointed at the end of his first term. And their rationale was that the judge already said there wasn't going to be a prison sentence, and that Trump still had the right to appeal this within the New York process. And so they didn't feel that it was justified to intervene in a pretty dramatic way to stop a state court proceeding from the federal court. But it is...
What would the logic be for the other four justices? I mean, sometimes we get so sucked into this thing of like, well, ideologically, of course, the liberals will say this and the conservatives will say this. But really, what could the justification be for Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh to believe that, that he shouldn't be sentenced?
I think it's a mix of executive power and the immunity decision, and a feeling that even though, in this case, I mean, this is what their rationale would be. I do think it is sort of political, unfortunately. But what they would say is this interferes with the president's ability to do his duties. He's not president yet, but that if you create a precedent...
What if he wants to go to Taylor Swift in Canada?
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
And that, he needs to be able to focus on being president. And so you have, Gorsuch, actually all four of them had worked in executive branch jobs. In Kavanaugh's case, he was White House counsel, or deputy White House counsel. And so, I think that they have this view of like the executive needs to be unencumbered to execute the duties of the presidency. That's what they would say.
And hence the immunity decision.
Exactly, in the first place, which Roberts and Barrett were on board with.
Let's talk about concerns of Alito's potential conflict of interest here, James.
So we learned first from ABC, and then ultimately was admitted to by Alito himself, that Donald Trump talked with Justice Alito on the same day that the Trump lawyers asked the Supreme Court to intervene and stop Mershon from issuing the sentence. Now, the reason we confirmed it happened is because Alito put out a statement through the Supreme Court press office saying that it was a discussion about how Trump should give a job in his administration to one of Alito's former clerks. It's this guy named Ed Levy. He was Bill Barr's chief of staff. And so there's a bunch of Trump people who are angry at Bill Barr for not supporting efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And so they're trying to blackball this guy, and he wants to be the Pentagon's general counsel. And so this guy, Levy, asked Alito to talk to Trump and like basically vouch for him being MAGA. And Alito agreed. And so then it's sort of amusing when you talk to people who are familiar with the call, because then Trump calls Alito, and Trump thought he was returning Alito's call, and Trump was like, "What do you want?" And Alito thought that Trump knew, and so there was it was clearly like a weird call. But Alito said in his statement that none of the cases came up, none of the decisions came up. He didn't even know that this emergency motion had been filed that same day, and has sort of defended it. But it does kind of cast this cloud over the court, and it does seem partisan and political. And what conservatives are saying in response is like, look, it's true that like law clerks often have their justices vouch for them when they're up for a big job, make a call saying that this is it's basically a job reference, and so if it's true that was the extent of the conversation, it's not necessarily unethical. It looks really bad, the optics, especially right now, and especially with everything else that's gone on, and the willingness of Alito and Thomas to basically go along with whatever Trump wants to do in every case, makes it smack of something, or smell of something rotten.
It is just incredible, and we do get sort of inured to it, that 4 different cases were proceeding against Donald Trump. We launched this podcast, Sidebar, to help sort of untangle and understand what the legal proceedings were and what was happening, as well as touch on the politics that were swirling around it all. Are all the cases essentially now gone, JM?
The short answer is yes. Right. 4 cases. The only one that goes to trial results in essentially nothing. Right. He has a felony record, but this is going to go on appeal here. The election was the ball game. Trump knew that. And that's where we ended up here.
Let's talk about Georgia.
Yeah.
Where's that?
So Fani Willis has been disqualified by an appeals court in Georgia from that case. She's appealing that now to the Georgia State Supreme Court. If the decision holds, it goes to an independent panel the case is not tossed out, but it goes to an independent panel to appoint a new attorney. The real risk here is we're talking about delays. This happened 2 years ago. Burt Jones, who's now the lieutenant governor of Georgia, was one of the fake electors in 2020 in Trump's effort to overturn the results in Georgia. Fani Willis indicted Burt Jones, and then she was removed she could not personally prosecute Burt Jones because of a conflict of interest, a court ruled. Took nearly 2 years to appoint a new prosecutor to the Burt Jones case. And then this September, that prosecutor decided not to bring charges. So Burt Jones is not going to be charged in that case. The exact same thing, and we were down in Atlanta last year covering this case, and that's what experts told us, which is if you remove a prosecutor, it doesn't remove the case, but it effectively kills the case because of how long the delay might take to appoint a new prosecutor.
Yeah, I mean, while Donald Trump is president, we are watching yet still to see if Jack Smith's reports on 2 different cases will ever see the light of day. What is the significance of those, Rhonda, and what are the developments in whether or not we'll see them? I mean, I'm picturing them like they're at DOJ, right?
On Tuesday night, Jack Smith.
Where are they? Where are they?
Jack Smith handed him over to Merrick Garland on Tuesday night.
I'm like, where are they? And physically, literally, and
on his desk.
Is there an air tag on them?
is there a guard? Rhonda, what's the latest?
Well, also separately from the news about Trump's sentencing and the Supreme Court ruling that they would not intervene in that last night, we also learned that there was an 11th Circuit court decision that the Jack Smith January 6th case report can be released. So that is yet another part of this shadow that is cast over Trump. We don't know. It could drop or become excerpts, at least, of it publicly available even before he is inaugurated in 10 days, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, 10 days. So I think that also, just big picture, it just shows that while some of these cases, well, nearly all of them, as JM just outlined, have just kind of evaporated or so tied up that they will never see the light of day, they still cast this incredible shadow. And you still see just, glimmers of them, or some of the effects of them still come up, still become news. And then you also have Trump talking about them voluntarily himself, going on again about how the legal system was weaponized against him. And it doesn't sound like he's going to stop that anytime soon. So I feel like even though these cases never met their conclusion, at least so far, they still are part of the Trump era. And they may be for a long time to come. How
intent on sort of revenge and retribution will Trump be now? Because the Jack Smith reports do loom large.
That's the big question going into the Trump presidency, vis-a-vis rule of law, lawfare, weaponization, whatever term you want to use. It was on this day, January 10th in 84 BC, that Caesar crossed the Rubicon. And there was no going back for the Roman Empire. And Trump has essentially warned that the Rubicon has been crossed. And he, we found out this week from reporting, someone else's reporting, that someone inside Fox News actually leaked to Trump questions, and that allowed
at a town hall,
and that allowed Trump's team to workshop an answer. And so that's where they came up with Trump's line, like, my retribution will be success, which is what he has said more recently. But we also have him on tape saying, I am your retribution. I am your revenge. I'm going to go after the people who came after us. They're coming after me because I'm standing in between you and them. That has been his message for years. Next week, Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, will have her confirmation hearing to become the U.S. Attorney General. She was the second choice after Matt Gaetz was dropped. And she has, I've talked to Democrats who have worked with her, or litigated against her, partnered with her. They say she's a serious lawyer, and they're sort of comfortable with her being Attorney General. So I think she is going to get confirmed. But she's also on tape on the news saying things like, that sound like she's going to go after the president's enemies. And it's been interesting watching, as we talk about Juan Merchan and the sentencing, the lawyers, the number 2 at DOJ under Pam Bondi is going to be Todd Blanche, who was one of Trump's lawyers in this, matter. And also Emil Bove, who was involved in the case. He is slated for it's like 5 words. It's like Deputy Associate Attorney General, but one of a senior job. And then John Sauer, who was the Trump lawyer who argued the immunity case before the Supreme Court, he's going to become the Solicitor General. So all these Trump lawyers who have been defending him are now going to the other side of the table. And they're in Todd Blanche's case, he was like a career prosecutor at Southern District of New York before he went into private practice. He was a prosecutor before. But anyway, I think that it is, we're going to continue to cover this, obviously. And it'll be fascinating to see what kind of commitments, if any, these Trump nominees make before the Senate Judiciary Committee next week about this. Ultimately, they don't need Democratic votes, so they don't need to say they're not going to go after the president's enemies.
Well, we'll leave it there because we'll be looking into all the next steps here next week on Sidebar. We'll be back on Thursday as regularly scheduled. Really grateful to Shayna for taking the time to talk with us. Also, James, Rhonda, and JM on this hugely newsworthy day of watching the conclusion, really, at this phase of Trump sentencing, but also of this sort of book of the New York, quote unquote, hush money case coming to a conclusion. Thank you to all of you. I'm Libby Casey. We'll talk to you on Sidebar next week.